why low-flow toilets are the poster child for the cultural war. Before we get started, we need to understand what the cultural war is. It's about cultural Marxism. I think this paper does the best job of defining what cultural Marxism is. It says, from this we see that cultural Marxism is the intellectual elaboration of a will to destroy as it pertains to traditional, cultural, and societal bastions. Karl Marx had a will to destruction, and the Communist Manifesto is a handbook for the destruction of the West. Cultural Marxism came about because traditional Marxists were frustrated that their emphasis on class warfare, as Marx taught, was not leading to the communist utopia that they were promised. So instead, they decided to focus on cultural issues, and anything that was Western was considered open season for critique and destruction. This is the basis of critical theory, which is the basis of critical race theory, and it's the basis of wokeism that's destroying the West. Okay, but why would you say the low-flow toilet is the poster child for the cultural war? Well, the first obvious reason is because it took a step backwards technologically. For years and years, we had to do our businesses in outhouses and holes just dug in the ground. Indoor plumbing was a modern marvel. It reduced disease, particularly the plagues of cholera and typhus, and significantly increased human life expectancy. Indoor plumbing was built on a toilet that could safely contain any waste products and flush them down through the public sewer system or to a septic tank. As late as the 1940s, there were plenty of places in the United States where people still relied on outhouses, which were disease traps. So engineers designed a toilet that could accomplish this goal with a minimum of cleaning and plumbing problems. And that design was built around a 7-gallon water flush. So in the average American household after World War II, until the introduction of the low-flow toilets in the 1990s, you could do your business in these 7-gallon tanks, and there was a rare case when you would actually leave what is euphemistically called a skid mark. In the average American household, there was maybe one plunger for all the toilets that existed in the household. There was maybe one toilet brush, and that toilet brush and those plungers were hidden away because they were rarely used. When there was a problem, you probably had to ask where the plunger was kept because no one remembered the last time you used it. But then some insane, irrational environmentalists convinced us that we were running out of water. This is the most insane Luddite position I've ever heard, and yet we keep hearing people repeat it with moral indignity, proving their stupidity. The total amount of water on Earth is the same as it was 2,000 years ago, 1,000,000 years ago, 1,000,000,000 years ago. So we're not running out of water. That's complete environmentalist bullshit. But then the true believers of environmentalist idiots will say stupid stuff like, oh, but the water's not where we need it. The water was never where we needed it. That's not a logical argument. The water has always been somewhere else. That's why we build infrastructure like dams and canals. This is not a quote-unquote water shortage. Really what we have here is an infrastructure shortage, which means that the lazy politicians want to spend our tax dollars on getting themselves reelected instead of doing their job. So we were sold this idea of low-flow toilets based on a premise that's so simple to disprove, a high school student could do it. So how did we end up with low-flow toilets? So we were not sold low-flow toilets on the idea that they would make our lives better, like most products in a capitalist society. In fact, the overwhelming evidence is that they did not make our lives better. They made our lives less pleasant, and they caused plumbing problems and increased our risk of disease. Now everyone has to live with a toilet plunger and a toilet brush right next to every single toilet. Almost every time they take a dump, they have to get out their toilet brush and get rid of the skid marks. which almost certainly increases the risk of disease. The way this was sold to the people was not that it would make their lives better, but it was a moral thing to do because it was a self-sacrifice, because you clearly were making your life worse, but it was a self-sacrifice. The way this was sold to the people was not that it would make their lives better, but it was a moral thing to do because it was a self-sacrifice. Doing something to make your life better is immoral because it's selfish. Under altruism, the prevailing ethical system in society, the only ethical thing that you can do is to do something that's not in your self-interest. In this case, it was clearly not for yourself that you bought a low-flow toilet. So this is the standard socialist technique, to use altruism to guilt-trip you into doing something that makes no sense. See COVID, where you were supposed to take an experimental jab for grandma or for society, not for your own protection. It should be noted that the true purpose and goal of environmentalists pushing low-flow toilets was to make your life as a Westerner miserable, so your life would be more like the rest of the world. Even though they were trying to guilt-trip people into buying low-flow toilets, there would have been no way to get the majority of people to voluntarily accept an inferior product without political coercion. The fact is, low-flow toilets didn't save money, and they didn't save water, since the amount of water on Earth is exactly the same. Their real goal was to make your life miserable. They do not value human life, they hate humans. Their goal is to eliminate 90 to 95% of the human population. This was to psychologically prepare you to deal with the fact that you're not as important as Mother Earth or Gaia, which is what these idiots worship in their stupid religion. Aesthetically, low-flow toilets are just gross. This is an example of Marxist political power and cultural Marxism purposely pushing something down people's throats that they know is not good for them, making them live like animals. They use the ethics of altruism and they attack reason because there's no rational reason for these stupid low-flow toilets. They deified Earth, which they call Gaia. So this is just a standard playbook for socialists. We should not buy into this bullshit. Low-flow toilets represent the perfect tactical battle and execution of the cultural war by Marxism. Another insane thing along this line was the elimination of nuclear power and the insanity of the German government recently to eliminate almost all of its nuclear power plants, which were functioning just fine, and replace these with solar and wind power, which even by their own standards are not environmentally friendly nor economically friendly. Now, all of a sudden, the Germans are having to pay through the nose for electricity, and it's destroying their industry. These environmentalists are Marxists, cultural Marxists, and their goal is destruction. Their goal is not to make anyone's lives better, not to save the Earth, it's to destroy the West. The elimination of nuclear power in the United States assured that instead of having cheap, almost limitless power, almost free power, the people of the U.S. have expensive electricity and are experiencing brownouts for the first time in the bullshit that wind power and solar power are anywhere near as cost effective, either as coal or certainly as nuclear power, is pure propaganda and beyond the imagination of stupidity. Another not well-known part of the cultural war is the glorification of drug-addicted artists, as we see particularly in musicians, but also in the form of irrationalism in modern art. Not surprisingly, the CIA sponsored both the drugged-out musicians and the anti-realistic artists, and the denigration of inventors. There's been a strong cultural push along the lines of cultural Marxism to suggest that genius and insanity are closely linked, and thus to glorify insanity, which is what they're doing in glorifying drugged-out musicians and these artists who are painting modern art. This is all part of an anti-reason push by cultural Marxists, because human flourishing, reason, and freedom are all linked together. Not surprisingly, psychologists have pushed this point of view, suggesting that there's a close link. But in fact, if you look at the history of geniuses, Aristotle, Bacon, Locke, Newton, Edison, Westinghouse, Gary Boone, who invented the microprocessor, Eli Whitney, Galileo, Gauss, none of them were insane or drugged out. They may have had bouts of depression, but they were not insane. Not surprisingly, none of the major inventors in the world were insane, because they dealt with the real world instead of some platonic abstract ideas which never actually produced anything useful. The glorification of drugged out irrational artists is in contrast with the denigration of the supremely rational inventors who've made our lives better. This denigration is exemplified by the character Doc, Back to the Future, where they portray inventors as harebrained eccentrics working on irrational projects like mind-reading devices, when in fact, not surprisingly, it's these absurd cultural Marxists at the CIA who've worked on mind control devices, not inventors. In my opinion, the low-flow toilet is the perfect poster child for the cultural war. It's anti-reason. It illustrates the use of the ethics of altruism to guilt-trip people. It also illustrates the desire to destroy the West and using the law to force people into conformity. Cultural Marxism is a tactical method of implementing a totalitarian society. In fact, on every level, every philosophical level, aesthetics, ethics, politics, epistemology, and metaphysics, the low-flow toilet represents anti-West, anti-reason ideas. We'll know when we're winning the cultural war when we see the end of the low-flow toilets and the return to sane high-flow toilets. Long live freedom, damn it.